In our live New Venture Championship format, the Keynote Luncheon is a chance for teams and judges to mingle and share a stress-free lunch after the morning's competition. In the virtual world, of course, that's not possible. Instead, we invite you to join us on our virtual event stage for a conversation I recorded with Jake Weatherly, CEO and co-founder of a company called SheerID. SheerID is an Oregon-based developer of a verification technology platform designed to make eligibility verification secure for all enterprises. Jake has led the company since its founding in 2011 through multiple investment rounds and to growth of over 150 employees. I'm honored to be joined by Jake Weatherly, CEO and co-founder of SheerID. Jake, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. What a great opportunity. And I have a lot of history with this program, and I'm really excited to have the opportunity to be the keynote speaker today.
Yeah, well, welcome. And it's fantastic to have you here on a beautiful spring afternoon in Eugene, Oregon. So let's talk a little bit about your career and how you came to be a co-founder of a tech company, sort of what that experience is like. So first question, sort of your first job out of college, or I think it was even before you finished college, was at a local software company called Palo Alto Software. Can you tell us a little bit about how that experience sort of informed your career in the early stages?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I started, as you said, part-time at Palo Alto Software. I think we were 11 team members at the time, and I was doing technical support and service over the telephone and via email. It was before even live chat, for example. And what was amazing about that experience was to start with an organization that was so small, with such a tremendous leader, Tim Berry, who is the founder and president of Palo Alto Software, but also to be immersed in entrepreneurship, because Palo Alto Software's live plan is really about forecasting and operating a business from the financial perspective. And so everyone who I was helping as a support and service representative was starting or growing a business in some way, shape, or form.
Right, and what were some of the key learnings you took from that job, both professionally for you as an employee, and then also sort of the business landscape and the business world?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I would say a couple of things. One, I started to observe a pattern with all of the entrepreneurs with whom I was speaking. And that pattern was that the best and the most successful were fueled when they heard no. And they were fueled to work harder when they were facing a challenge. So I think grit and persistence were really represented in all of those conversations that I had with all of those entrepreneurs. The other thing that I learned very early at Palo Alto Software was the importance of process and repeatability and documentation. Some of the things that sometimes feel like an administrative burden or even kind of boring, they turn out to be very, very important to a business as it scales.
Absolutely, that growth process is really important, and it's something that you only learn about if you work for a company that's got good processes and operations. So very interesting, very interesting. I think your next gig was working in sales for Webex, which is kind of interesting because today we're all over Zoom and web conferencing, but this was a few years back before video conferencing had really taken off. What was that experience like, and how did that sort of add to your toolbox, so to speak?
It's true. This was at a time before we even GoToMeeting or FaceTime or anything along those lines. So Webex really was the pioneer of web collaboration, screen sharing, video conferencing, and then we were acquired while I was there by Cisco Systems, and then we became part of a unified communication strategy. So everything from phone to chat to live video and screen sharing. There was a very specific reason why I went to Webex. So later, during my time at Palo Alto Software, I started doing custom versions of software for large organizations. and then developing training for those organizations in order to learn how to use the tools and get maximum adoption. And I started doing that using Webex. And so I became a huge evangelist, loved the platform, and I was recruited into Webex to sell. I remember having conversations, having not been a quota-carrying salesperson in the past, about it feeling maybe like a little slimy, like, is this used car sales? How does this work? Am I supposed to go in and just like always be closing or something like that? And what I learned is solution selling and really positioning value and trying to find alignment between a prospect's objectives and, in this case, Webex's capabilities was the key to success, and I loved it. All of us at Webex stay in touch, and we all laugh and say that we measure it in dog years.
Well, that's part of the challenge of today, right? As you and I both move into sort of later parts of our career, mid-career, I'll call it, right? You can look back at the things you've learned and the things you've done and say, oh, remember when, this video conference thing was novel and new and so on, right? As we talk to one another over a video feed that will stream over the internet. Just, it's how we work today. So you went back to Palo Alto Software as VP of Customer Experience. And could you tell us a little bit about what that was like to, have left sort of the nest, if you will, gone out and got some professional experience and then come back to a company that you knew well? Sort of, what do you think prepared you for your role as a leader from your previous career?
So there were a couple of paths that I was considering post-Cisco acquisition of Webex. One of those paths was to go international. I thought that might be an accelerator and then obviously super interesting as well. But my wife and I kept our home here in Eugene, and most of my family has moved to Eugene from Michigan, where I grew up outside of Ann Arbor. And so our roots were here, and there were so many wonderful team members and so much potential at Palo Alto Software. They called after Tim had stepped down as the president and handed the reins to the current CEO, Sabrina Parsons. And so it was a great way to get the band back together and to look at all of the potential at Palo Alto Software through fresh eyes and to develop more leadership capabilities for me personally and for my career.
Yeah, and that's one piece of it, right? Is you stay where you're comfortable and you make decisions not only based on your professional career, but your lifestyle and your family and all of those other considerations that sort of life plays when you're making decisions about it. So, interesting. So, as you move up to vice president, how did you adapt to working in a leadership position with people who knew you from sort of your earliest days as in your first job?
Sure. So there's a sort of world in business called turnaround, and a lot of it is driven by private equity firms or public companies that go private in order to grow and then maybe come back out to the public markets. And I would say that this was my miniature version of a turnaround opportunity. There were a lot of things that were going well, but there were also a lot of things that weren't like fully high performing and ready to scale and ready to go to the next level. So frankly, one of the things that I had to do there and I learned how to do was to manage people out of a position in order to bring in the next level or stage appropriate individual. I think the question is, do we have the right seats on the bus? And then the question that naturally follows is, do we have the right people in those seats? So that was really difficult, but I learned how to do it in a very respectful way, and most of the terminations that I made are folks who are still friends, and they moved on in their careers in a very healthy way. The other thing that I learned was the power of metrics, of measurable and achievable goals, and the power of stretch goals. It really fuels individuals and teams to perform at their peak and to bring their very best every day. And so we were very, very dashboard and goal oriented, and everybody always knew what they needed to achieve literally on a daily basis in order to continue to advance our strategy. And managing to the numbers and managing to the metrics, although it can sound kind of sterile, it puts everybody on the same page, and they work hard and they work collaboratively and they work together in order to achieve goals as a team.
Yeah, and that management process sort of is something that's important to understand as you become a CEO, right? You've got to have that background in knowing how to operate a business, because in a small company, you're doing everything. And so laying that foundation, working with people, building the metrics and dashboard for what you're trying to become, that's critical. So yeah, interesting time. And we could probably talk about Palo Alto software all day, but it's not what we're here to talk about. You've moved on to start your own company, SheerID, in 2011, founded that company. Could you sort of help me understand a little bit of the origin story of that company?
Sure. So my wife was teaching in a third grade classroom at the time. My father-in-law is a military veteran. I had observed software companies with student and professor and all sorts of programs that were basically specifically designed to attract these very, very well-defined market segments or consumer tribes, if you will, with free product, VIP experience, discounted pricing, etc. And what I found is that all of these programs that my wife was experiencing, that my father-in-law was experiencing, that students were experiencing, there was this broken last mile aspect of these programs. And that broken last mile was waiting to have your application processed or having to share highly sensitive, personally identifiable information in order to verify your eligibility. So if you think about being a college student and trying to get your 50% discount on Spotify Premium, do your mom and dad want you to send a copy of your class schedule to a customer service agent somewhere in order for that to prove your student status? That schedule is super, super sensitive information. It shows, where you are each day of the week at each time. And so the way that we looked at the world is eligibility should really be determined using data and software. And so we started to connect to authoritative databases like the enrollment databases at university and colleges in order for an individual to raise her hand and say, I want you to know this about me, and I want you to check because I'm excited about what's on the other side. And we were able to measure that process in milliseconds rather than days, not require documents, and keep the fraud out of the equation in order for all of these programs to remain very high quality and authentic and legitimate.
That's a kind of a classic example of software solving an analog problem that just hadn't been done before, right? It was just sitting there a problem waiting to be solved, really.
Yeah, and I would say that's actually one of the biggest challenges, especially in that early stage, is we were going to prospective customers, the brands like Nike and Lowe's Home Improvement and others, and saying, this software solution is designed for application processing, eligibility verification, etc. And we would work with executives at these large companies who were challenged because intuitively they could understand that it would be valuable for them to adopt and they would be able to grow their programs and eliminate fraud. But there wasn't like a line item in the budget for eligibility verification software. So we were having to educate and almost like create our own market and create our own category. And so there were a lot of challenges. It often felt like we were, paddling upstream against a really strong current, but we just kept at it.
Yeah, and that idea of creating a market, bringing something new to an industry or to a customer base, and then having them, like you say, really trying to figure out, well, who pays for this? Like,
Right.
what's the value for us? And
right.
Yeah. So
I think it's one thing to have a good idea, right? Then add that prospective customers also agree that it's a good idea, but that doesn't mean that anybody's going to open their wallet and pay to use that idea. And so you really have to have that combination in order to know that you have a viable business ahead of you.
Absolutely, yeah. The business plan and the idea is worth the paper it's printed on, right? So
right.
You gotta make it happen and get customers to, like you say, open the wallets, put a line item in the budget, etc. So
right.
When you started, did you have an idea of what you thought was the biggest risk factor? Whether that was technical risk in terms of building the system to do what you thought it could do, sort of market risk, sort of team risk, finding the right people, competitive threats. What were the biggest risks you thought at the time?
Yeah, I think the biggest risk that we saw at the time were market risks. Will this actually be adopted? Can we get big enough customers in order to start developing customer-based marketing and case studies and ROI analysis and those kinds of things? It's one thing for company representatives or team members to be out there evangelizing the value of the products and solutions that they've created. It's another thing to have customers actually realizing that value, and then for those customers to be evangelical and excited to share what they've learned and what they're achieving. So I think that was the biggest kind of chicken or egg aspect, right? How do we get customers, and then how do we create those evangelists in order to get more customers? The other thing was, you can in essence look at what SheerID does as a two-sided marketplace. There's data on one side of our enterprise software platform, and then there are customers' programs on the other side of the platform. And so we had to get enough data access in order to excite the customers with a full coverage solution. We couldn't just go to all the businesses in Eugene and say we do University of Oregon student verification. We really had to create a nationwide solution, and then since then we've created a global solution.
Yeah, that chicken or egg is one of those challenging things, and so many multi-sided marketplaces or multi-sided platforms run into that challenge. It's like which side do I build out first? Answering that question is unique to every individual entity, but it's definitely a challenge. How did you know, or what was the event sort of helped you feel like, aha, we've got this, we've gotten some traction, and this is going to work?
So I think it was, April 2014. Our two biggest customers to date launched in the same week, and verification volume literally grew 10 times in that week. That's when we knew, that we had passed the test in terms of uptime, reliability, scalability, right? We always talk about 10x, 100x, 1000x. 10x because we can experience that at any time with a big customer launch. 100x because we believe that we can go out and capture that market. And 1000x because that's what we believe the total addressable market is. And to actually experience that, 10x overnight and still hold up, I think that's when we knew, okay, we're really on to something here, and let's double down.
Cool. I can only imagine what it felt like to go through that time period where it's going to work. You as a CEO you don't have control over things, but
right.
You're just hoping that the team pulls together and everything works out.
And it can feel almost like be careful of what you wish for when you're facing that risk and you're facing the potential challenges. But it worked for SheerID, and we're really proud that we've continued to scale even far beyond that.
Cool. Yeah, it's every entrepreneur's dream, yet on the flip side, nightmare to know that you have to scale and get big and deliver. So good work. So as you've done this, you've sort of built the company in what I think is an interesting way financially with investors over time. So over the first, I think it was 4 years of the company, you raised relatively limited amounts of capital in relatively small chunks, and then got to a place where you were able to take some larger venture capital money to really push some growth. What was the thinking behind the strategy early on to sort of limit your seeking of capital?
Yeah, so I think that we were really in building mode, right? The data side, in order to actually build high quality, high coverage verification products, certainly building the platform to make it easy for customers to onboard and to launch and then to measure the performance of those programs. So there was quite a bit of time to get that done, and not just like MVP, like minimal viable product, but like truly get to what we believed had to be enterprise class and had to be highly secure in order to attract big customers. Because we're definitely an enterprise and strategic focused organization in terms of customer acquisition. We're not like a small business solution per se. And so we really needed to get to the level of sophistication that would be needed in order to like supercharge the go-to-market strategy. The other thing that I strongly believe is that teams should really only seek institutional capital when they're ready. And I think part of readiness is that you have a real business, that you have real customers, you've proven that they stay and they grow, you have real revenues, and you have the stage appropriate level of processes and frameworks and predictability and repeatability in place. That way, I think you can invite that next level of sophistication in the boardroom with oversight, with strategic development, all the things that good partners at VC firms bring to the table. But if you're not ready for it, I think it can be really scary. It can almost be like disruptive. So I think, knowing what prepared means for your business and your team is very important. Plus then your story and your plan and your vision and your outlook are that much better, because you're talking about a real business that has established some level of product market fit and can grow based on that solid foundation, rather than asking sophisticated institutional investors to give you money to continue to experiment.
Yep, and it's all about removing that risk, right? You take the technical risk out of the process, you take the team risk off the table, you get to the market, and then that's when institutional capital says, okay, if we put dollars in, we have a pathway to growth, which is what venture capitalists are really seeking, right? They want to see their investment grow rapidly and expand into a really successful company.
100% agreed. Even still, though, that far into it, there was a lot of risk. In early stage, seed stage and Series A, venture capitalists have experienced a lot of risk. And what we were trying to do was understand that risk, take as much out as possible, yet at the same time, I think facing it and being transparent about it and working on it and finding folks who are helpful, all of those things are keys to success at that stage.
Yeah, it's a team effort on all levels, right? You've got your employees, but then you bring in investors, and it brings an entirely new sort of support structure and dynamic to the company, and new relationships that you have to manage.
No doubt.
Yeah, and as a CEO, sort of, what changed with the business once you brought in more a higher value of investors, but also those venture capital and institutional investors?
So I think a lot changed as it relates to reporting, being data-driven, and looking forward, but not just looking forward with fingers crossed, but looking forward with plans and goals and measurable milestones, and an ability to pull data and keep your finger on the pulse of the performance of the business as you're accelerating toward achieving those goals. There's a lot of rigor around forecasting and then achieving your forecast. And sure, things change and sometimes challenges arise, but the most important thing to understand, in my opinion, and what I learned the most quickly, is that the accuracy of the forecast and the performance of the business against those numbers are the keys to success with a sophisticated board and institutional investors.
Yeah, when you are the CEO of a venture-backed company, you don't work for yourself anymore, right? You work for the board and for the company, and it's you have an entirely new level of accountability and someone essentially managing you.
This is exactly right. And then you have all of your team members who are driving toward those shared objectives. And your team members have to be really good, right? You really have to up-level in a lot of cases in order for your annual planning and your forecasting to be accurate, not just aspirational.
Yeah, not guesses in the wind, but actual like fundamentally grounded in some of the data that you've got and the assumptions you're trying to prove out.
Because you want to hit your numbers, right? If you miss, then new questions arise. Can this team actually achieve this? Are they accurately understanding the market dynamics? Are they losing customers and that's why they fell short? But at the same time, and I learned this as well, you don't want to dramatically exceed your goals. There's kind of this sweet spot, because if you dramatically exceed your goals, then basically the same questions arise. Are these people sandbagging? Are they like missing fundamental market dynamics because they blew it out of the water so far beyond expectations? Inaccuracy is inaccuracy, even if it's like on the positive side in terms of business performance.
Yeah. Wall Street, and this isn't a public company, but investors reward accuracy and steadiness, right? Not so much out of the park performance. So, interesting. So, as it's kind of every entrepreneur's, founding CEO's dream, right? To get that big slug of capital that helps you execute on your ultimate plan that you've thought about and dreamed about since day one. In the end, has that been sort of a relief or a stressor on you as a CEO?
I would say it's both. In the relief category, it gets the management team and me as the CF or CEO off of the fundraising treadmill and off of the constantly thinking about funding and fundraising. I think that's really helpful, because you can concentrate on growing the business, you can concentrate on leading, you can concentrate on operating the business and opening new opportunities. I think where it's not just, kick back and go back to regularly scheduled programming is that with a lot of outside capital comes a lot of pressure and responsibility to grow and to achieve goals. And so I think it further ratchets up the context, because you're talking about real big dollars at that point, and it almost then tunes down to some of the fine-tuned risk that you need to mitigate instead of the bigger risk factors.
Yeah, it's both a blessing and a curse, right? You're off the like you say, the fundraising treadmill, which can be a full-time job plus some for a lot of venture-backed CEOs. But now you've got and then on the other flip side of that, you've got to execute, and that's just
right.
The pressure is on to perform.
Totally. And one of the great things is that it opens up new opportunities. Like SheerID is expanding rapidly in Europe right now. And we're starting to do indirect deals with strategic partners where we're building SheerID into other platforms. The other thing that it opens up is the ability to start looking at the market from a different perspective, which is, are there opportunities for us to acquire businesses in order to grow the space, or in order to start consolidating the space, or something along those lines. So while you trade some of the pressures of fundraising for other things, the other things can be both exciting, but frankly a little bit scary sometimes.
Yeah, a lot of times you're doing things you haven't done before. So it's part of the process, right? Continuing to learn and grow as a leader and as a CEO. So
Yeah, and I'd say that's the best part of the process. Through this whole adventure, and even earlier in my career, as we discussed, I think what drives me is what's next and what's new, and so far so good. But it's really rewarding. It's intellectually stimulating, and the sense of accomplishment is just off the charts.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, congratulations on getting to this place and continuing to have success. I know it's wonderful to see that you've made this progress through your career.
Thank you. I think a lot of it is the fortune of timing, and there's no substitute for that. Sometimes as an entrepreneur, you need a little bit of luck or some tailwinds on your side, and we've been really fortunate to have that at SheerID.
Yeah. A lot of great ideas came too early. A lot of great ideas show up just a little past when the market was ready for them. It's there's a lot of sort of unknowns that you just can't plan for.
So true.
You take those. So a little bit more of a sort of personal question. You're a father of 3 boys. How do you explain the job of a CEO to your kids?
I would have answered this differently pre-COVID, but I think I have a lot more context to share now because, for the past year, they were learning from home and I was working from home, and we were in rooms, next to each other in a lot of cases, or they would quietly come into the room if they had finished a lesson and I was on a call. And so we've gotten to know what one another does all the way down into the weeds in a lot of cases. So I think they have so much more context based on, and it's not necessarily super healthy, and I'm looking forward for post-COVID days, but for the past year, SheerID came into my home instead of me leaving and going to SheerID. And so what they've observed and what we talk about a lot is leadership. It's about the quality of relationships with colleagues and team members, the quality of relationships with customers and partners, transparency, taking things very, very seriously, understanding that surprises, whether positive or negative, are generally not well received, and really being, I think, open and transparent in terms of information sharing with team and with board and with customers and with partners in order for everybody to be truly on the same page and driving with their all toward shared outcomes and shared goals.
Yeah, and it's so many of us have experienced that where the joys of being together in the home through COVID allows you to see into the world of your children and how they learn and how they interact with their classmates. I find that to be one of the most rewarding parts of it. But on the flip side is, they get to see how you deal with challenging situations, and I'm sure you found yourself sort of explaining what was happening to them as they're like, well, what were you doing there, right?
Yeah, and I think they also got to see, especially as we were expanding into Europe and doing some other things, they got to see that sometimes being a CEO starts at 5 a.m. With a discussion with people in Finland and ends at midnight with a discussion with people like in Hawaii, right? I mean, you're kind of always on, and that includes Saturdays and Sundays. COVID, I think, was a little bit difficult in terms of setting or maintaining boundaries, but I do think that that partway through we started to find a really healthy work-life balance. If your batteries aren't charged up, if you're not spending time doing the things that you love and with those who you love, it really can lead to burnout, or it could lead to poor performance, because it's important to be psychologically healthy and whole in order to be a great leader and a high performer.
Absolutely, and just the physical, taking care of yourself physically to, stand in or sit in front of a screen and cameras for multiple hours for a day. It's
so true.
As we've all learned, it seems relatively easy, but man, it's a long day of Zooms will take it all out of you, right?
It's true. It makes the Apple Watch and like the stand-up feature and all of that kind of stuff feel so much more relevant.
Totally. And we don't even want to get into how amazing that technology is when you consider how far we've come, but
I agree.
That's a whole nother conversation.
For sure.
Last little question, sort of what keeps you motivated to continue to grow and lead this company?
I think it's still the validation from customers and from those who are going through the verification process. It's, every day we get thank yous and we get to have customer conversations about expansion and just the excellence of what we're doing together as strategic partners. I think I'm really motivated by the intellectual stimulation and the sense of accomplishment of seeing all of our hard work working so well for others. And that gets me up in the morning with full energy to keep doing it and do it again. And even in challenging times with customers who may have an issue with how they implemented our technology or have had a difficult time because of macroeconomic conditions, even those are opportunities to learn and to grow and to help. And I think that goes back to my roots in service and support and sales. Being on the front lines and being with that customer base during hard times and during great times is really, in my opinion, the heart of what we do as entrepreneurs, and I would hate to lose that.
Yeah, it's the motivation to just keep working with people and see your ideas start to really make a difference in people's lives. And I'm sure I can only imagine the impact that just some of the relatively simple thing that you do to let them access a program or a discount or a place, a website, whatever it might be, right? That can be life-changing for people just to make it easy.
Yeah, indeed. And to take the friction out, but also just keep the fraudsters out.
Yeah, indeed. And we all know will continue to be a challenge as we move forward. Well, Jake, I really appreciate your time and willingness to engage with us as I think about the comment on a CEO being a 24/7 job as you have to deal with folks in Europe and Asia. I want to say thank you from our Asian school participants who may be seeing this at the wee hours of the morning where they're at. But it's wonderful to have you back as an alumni of the university and as a local success story, but also as someone who's built a business that really has an impact and probably has a lot more runway to be successable.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Good luck to everybody in the competition. I'm rooting for you.
Yep, we'll see. We may have a winner who ends up being a venture-funded, global impacting company. So we shall see. Thank you, Jake.
Thank you very much.